I think we can start now. Dear colleagues, I would like to welcome you to the following session, which has the title Children's Online Safety, Central Eastern European Perspective. Personally, I'm very, very glad that we managed to integrate this session onto the agenda, because usually at different events we have quite a lot of Western European input, and actually we don't have much knowledge about what's going on in Central and Eastern Europe, especially in outside EU countries. And we have 4 speakers for this session, and the first ones to come will be Russian representatives from Russian Association of Electronic Communications. And I have a pleasure to welcome Mr. Mark Tverdynin, who is the director of Russian Association of Electronic Communications, and he's a specialist in internet technologies for education and child safety online, a very active person in this field in Russia. And the presentation will be delivered jointly with Urvan Parfentiev. Welcome.
Thank you. Oops. Dear colleagues, development and evolution of the Internet, increasing amount of its users, regretfully causes increase of Internet threats. That is true probably for almost any country, and of course it's true for such a fast-growing Internet zone as the Russian one. These threats are targeted on different categories of users depending on their age, profession, place where they access the Internet, and many other criteria. Russian National Web Zone is notable due to one of the highest rates of growing in the world. In 2002, we had about 8 million web users. In 2005, already 17 million, and now we have more than 32 million users who have about 36 million computers in their households. Internet users in Russia are rather young, and youth audience had increased after all Russian schools were given access to the web. That's more than 54,000 schools, even in tundra and countryside. Every third Russian child gets to the Internet at least once in 3 months. Such an increase resulted in a situation with Internet threats that we have now. According to the Western research, Russian Web Zone has become one of the main producer and distributor of program threats, viruses, Trojans, and other malicious software. We had several large-scale international phishing cases, and child porn with the post-Soviet origin keeps the second place in the web after American one. If we look at the situation with Internet threats for children in Russia, we have to note that priority number 1 for Russia are content threats or aggressive content. Some of them take the same place as in the Western domain zones, like child porn, kidnapping using Internet, and pedophile attacks. First of all, these types of aggressive content are easily accessible. For example, via search engines on absolutely normal phrases like Barbie doll, or via banners. Another problem, pedophiles and kidnappers are really trusting, so the child believes them and meets offline. According to Russian Cyberpol, so-called Department K, in 2007 they processed 995 reports with the information about child porn resources. But generally, situation with content threats in Russia is rather different from one in Europe, because significant part of them is taken by other Internet threats that are not so actual in, for example, European Union. that is a propaganda of terrorism, political extremism, and religious cults, criminal propaganda, and instructions how to commit crime, for example, how to make a grenade at home. Violence and happy slapping, especially with children as victims. Privacy invading and illegal publication of personal data, including private photos and videos. For blogs, chats, and forums, it is typical to see cyberbullying and simply inappropriate behavior, very often comparing with the West. Those being bullied or offended use malicious software for revenge. Terrorist and extremist propaganda is often targeted on youth, 12 to 18 years old, because they are not experienced enough to carefully analyze information, but they are filled with protest and demand to live by themselves. That is being used by another that is being used by authors of such content. So it is attractive especially for youth. In design, text appeals and often tries to deepen generations' conflict. Usually these sites are hosted abroad or on free hosting services. In 2007, about 40 terrorist resources were shut down in Russia. The international mechanism used by government organizations are often slow and political differences apply. So the process of hunting down terrorist propaganda is slower than it is expected. Cyberbullying is typical for chats, forums, and especially blogs. Young authors often think that there will be no physical consequences for what they are doing in the web, so they allow themselves to behave in the manner they would not take in offline analog. The problem deepens with propaganda of denying any ethical regulations in the web, what is mistaken for freedom of the web. Instead of freedom, we get anarchy, and the kids learn that the web is a place where everyone can do everything. So some begin to think that internet is something bad or basic or nothing requiring some responsibility can be done in the web. So such places often have low level of self-regulation and moderation, so bullied kids do not get adequate protection from responsible moderators of the services. Violence in the web, texts, photos, and videos with violence are often made specially for being published in the web. Western happy slapping has quickly come to Russia and became not only popular but also commercialized. Web services sometimes pay for such content, so youth has an economic motivation to make it. So they take any person, a classmate, for example, or any kid in the street. Being commercialized, web violence was taken into account by organized criminality. They produce and publish such content, sometimes with kidnapped children, which are kept for such filming as slaves. Another problem is that a victim is chosen on the basis of his or her nationality, race, or confession. So violence or happy slapping goes along with extremism, and such content is a kind of propaganda. Cults propaganda came in the internet from the streets and is very effective, being targeted on easily convinced people or those who have problems in life. Some cults especially targeted on youth and are kind of extremist or criminal groups on religious basis. They make their members to commit crimes of different types, from robbery to murders and terrorist acts. Membership in cults turns out to be dangerous not only for psychological status, but also for health and life. There are plenty of cults that practice suicides. Cults propaganda in the web is absolutely different. We can find there Satanists or Scientologists or extremist cults like Shinrikyo in Japan. Some smart people create cults for fraud to get as much money and property, for example, realty, from their successors as possible. The danger for children is not only in propaganda targeted on them, but also in involving kids in cults by their parents, even against the will of child himself. Aggressive content is more dangerous in the situation when users of the internet have very few knowledge about what threatens them from their computers. Internet users, including children, experience lack of professional and clear information on the problem. Gossips in media and forums just make panic and cause strange myths about internet. For example, that there is just porn. To get clear and accessible information about types of threats, damage they cause, methods and detection and treatment is really problematic for most of typical users, especially youth, because such information must be understandable and interesting for them. Another problem is how to counteract effectively with aggressive content, what to do to get rid of it, where to call or where to go. If we talk about children and youth, we have to point out that there are still not many educating resources in Russian on this topic, as it is desired by internet community and users. Getting such knowledge about internet threats at school lessons is also a problem, because school programs do not point necessary attention to this issue. School children are still taught mostly basic skills in programming, but not the culture of using the internet. If we take other disciplines, beyond computer science, computer technologies are just coming there, and teachers sometimes do not know computers at all, so the kid cannot get information from other teachers. So the child comes home, but parent may not have contact with computer or internet at all, or at least they do not know where to find information to teach and protect their children. Another side of the problem is that the culture of direct cooperation between civil society and police in active protection from crimes has been lost with the collapse of the USSR. So if parents find aggressive content, most of them will not inform the police directly. As Russian psychologists say, about 69% prefer to avoid any contacts with Russian law enforcement organizations. So the time came to do some new development in Russia, and I introduce my colleague Urvan Parfentiev, who will tell you about the node that we have established.